No one expected the Terran delegation to send a gardener to the peace summit, especially not one wearing a stained khaki jacket, cargo pants sagging with pockets full of seeds, and a weather-worn sun hat pulled low over a grizzled face. Yet there he was, standing before the Grand Assembly of 40 Worlds, next to Earth's official ambassador, holding what appeared to be a stick. The chamber fell silent as the alien dignitaries turned their compound eyes, scaled heads, or photoreceptive membranes toward the human oddity. Towering behind the podium, Ambassador Raltov of the Corexi Confederacy spoke into the translation array. "Is this an offering?" the ambassador said, voice slick with disdain. "A ceremonial staff? A primitive token?" The human in question shrugged. "It's just a stick. Picked it up out back." Snorts, churs, and mechanical laughter echoed through the chamber. Earth's ambassador, a composed woman named Aisha Bell, winced slightly. "This is Franklin Royce," she said smoothly, though her diplomatic calm was tested. "He tends to the gardens aboard our ship. He insisted on attending." "Insisted?" hissed Raltov. "Your world sends a gardener with a twig to a weapons demonstration against the entity?" That got everyone's attention. The entity. Even the name sent a ripple of dread through the room. It was not a species, not even a machine, but a phenomenon, an impenetrable, adaptive force of nature that had consumed 6 colony worlds and shrugged off everything the Galactic Council had thrown at it. Plasma barrages, antimatter mines, quantum implosion arrays. Nothing worked. No weapon could touch it. So the summit had gathered not for negotiation, but desperation. Aisha nodded grimly. "We've exhausted every known offensive measure. And while Franklin might seem unconventional, he's not here to fight. He's here because he saw something the rest of us missed." All eyes returned to Franklin. The man scratched his beard and tapped the stick on the polished assembly floor. It clacked. "You all been trying to kill it like it's a beast," he said. "It ain't a beast. It's fungus." A pause. "Fungus?" squeaked the Zentari delegate, its stalks quivering. Franklin nodded. "Spreads through spores, reacts to environmental aggression, feeds off radiation. Damn thing's a mushroom storm with a grudge." The chamber erupted in disbelief. "The entity collapsed an entire moon," shouted a Cornari warlord. "Exactly," Franklin said. "It burrowed into the core, fed on thermal vents, then bloomed so fast it cracked the rock from inside. But it avoids cold, shade, dry zones. It's alive, yeah, but not invincible. You just been using the wrong approach." The room settled again, this time with uneasy curiosity. It wasn't the theory, it was the delivery. The man spoke as though he were explaining tomato rot, not galactic extinction. Raltov sneered. "And what does your stick do against this fungal god?" Franklin grinned. "It pokes it." A moment of stunned silence. Even Aisha opened her mouth, closed it, then gave up trying to explain. Franklin held up the stick like a wand. "This thing, hickory, tough, dense, doesn't rot easy, good against creeping molds. Back on Earth, I use it to poke puffballs, break up root knots, stir compost heaps, same principle. You irritate the mycelium just right, poke the nodes, it curls up or dies off. Fungi don't like mechanical interference they can't interpret." Raltov's face twisted. "This is madness." But the Xiran scientist at the edge of the dais was already adjusting her datapad. Her people had studied Earth ecology. The idea wasn't completely absurd. "You think it's mycelial?" she asked, her translated voice smooth and clipped. "Yep," Franklin replied. "Decentralized intelligence. Neural-like growth. It's not fighting us because it's angry. It's just spreading. But if you interact on the microscale, poking, scraping, drying, it might recoil." Aisha interjected quickly. "He's proposing we test localized mechanical disruption. Not high energy. Physical. Low-frequency stress." The council murmured. The logic was bizarre, but so had been the entity's immunity. Perhaps it needed a bizarre solution. 3 days later, Franklin Royce stood on the observation deck of the joint science vessel Threnody. Below, on the surface of a barren moon recently touched by the entity, a field team prepared the first test. Drone swarms circled the writhing black tendrils that had begun to colonize a crater. They had grown in minutes, not hours. "We're ready," came the Xiran voice over comms. "Release the stick," Franklin said. The drones deployed a mechanical arm holding a simple rod, a hickory batten, machined to replicate the original Franklin carried. It poked. At first, nothing happened. Then the tendrils convulsed. Monitors flared with activity. Bioluminescent threads flared red. The mass writhed, then pulled back from the poked zone. One of the drones jabbed again, this time with a circular motion. The retreat spread. "Holy spores," whispered a technician. More arms were deployed. Poking, prodding, scraping. Where before the entity adapted or devoured, now it recoiled like flesh from fire. The growth halted. Back on the deck, Franklin leaned on the railing, looking unimpressed. "Told ya. Sometimes the stick's enough." Later that night, while the council debriefed and the scientists scrambled to formalize protocols for intergalactic fungus control, Aisha found Franklin in the gardens aboard the Terran cruiser. He was humming, trimming a bonsai tree. "That was reckless," she said. "And brilliant." "Not really," he said, without looking up. "Just gotta understand what you're dealing with. Can't always blast your way through. Sometimes you poke it till it gets bored." She smiled. "Earth thanks you, Franklin." He shrugged. "I just didn't want to lose my greenhouse." In the distance, the entity, once unstoppable, was being chased from crater to crater by what the galaxy would later call the stick doctrine. It wouldn't make sense to anyone, except to humans. The entity wasn't gone, it was retreating, and that made it worse. At first, the council celebrated. They issued immediate mandates to construct thousands of autonomous stick units, a term that made the Quinari ambassador groan out loud. Military drones retrofitted with spring-loaded pokers were dispatched to infected zones. Everywhere the poking occurred, the entity retracted. Simple. Clean. No energy weapons, no collateral damage. But by week 2, the pattern changed. Franklin Royce sat in a sterile lab aboard the Threnody, surrounded by glimmering walls of data streams. Unlike most of the scientists who wore formal envirosuits, he still wore his stained khakis and carried a thermos of herbal tea. A hollow-eyed technician approached him. "It's learning." Franklin raised a brow. "The mushrooms, the entity. It's watching the pokes." Images displayed across the main holoscreen. Drone footage showed writhing fields of black mycelium avoiding the poke zones, but no longer retreating. In some regions, it had grown around the poking bots, forming hollow rings of untouched space. "It's adapting," said Aisha, arriving at Franklin's side. Her uniform was wrinkled, her voice clipped with tension. "It recognizes the mechanical threat, but has found a way to avoid it without triggering retreat." Franklin frowned. So it learned to flinch, but not to leave. The Xeran scientist, Dr. Relic, tapped the screen. More than that, it started absorbing the poking devices in areas where response is delayed. Not attacking, digesting. The same way it does with traditional weapons, just slower. Franklin blew into his tea. "Should have figured. Mycelium has memory. It'll reroute when a root dies." "We need another idea," Aisha said. He scratched his chin. "Can't go brute force. And we can't keep poking the same way. Maybe we need a different kind of stick." The council wasn't thrilled. A second summit convened, this time in emergency chambers. No ceremonial podiums, no grand orchestras of welcome. Just delegates, generals, and a projection of the ever-expanding entity spreading across planetary crusts. Franklin stood at the center of a digital map. "You ever see a dog get bored of fetch?" he asked the assembly. Raltov narrowed his eyes. "This is not a pet." "Exactly. It's not playing anymore. So we gotta change the game. I propose Stick 2.0. There was a pause. "Explain," said Dr. Relic, though her mandibles twitched with interest. "Mechanical interference worked because it confused the thing. But now it's learned the rhythm. What if we randomize it? Pressure points, timing, frequency. Poke it like it's jazz. Keep it guessing." Confusion spread across several delegates' faces. "Jazz?" asked the Zentari, perplexed. Franklin smiled. "Improvised disruption. Instead of poking to push it back, poke to confuse. Throw its growth pattern into disarray. Like walking into a forest and rearranging all the branches so the moss doesn't know which way to grow." Aisha leaned forward. "You're proposing a psychological assault on a non-sentient fungal intelligence." Franklin nodded. "Basically, yeah." To their credit, the council didn't laugh this time. Within 48 hours, the Threnody launched new drones outfitted with multi-pronged arms. The mechanisms were programmed to move unpredictably, like flailing toddlers or drunken spiders. No two pokes were the same. They prodded with speed, paused erratically, twisted, scraped, and occasionally did nothing at all. The results were immediate and bizarre. The entity stalled. In areas touched by the jazz-poking bots, growth ceased entirely. It didn't flee. It didn't fight. It froze. It's stunned, said Dr. Relic, observing under high-res scan. Neurological dissonance in the mycelial network. Franklin leaned over the display. Like a computer loop-in. Or a deer sea in headlights. But success bred arrogance. And bureaucracy. Soon the larger factions began to roll out mass disruption squads. Huge orbital cannons designed to fire randomized disruption bursts based on the poke patterns. The problem? They ignored Franklin's most crucial point. No rhythm, he shouted at the Terran Military Council when they installed synchronized disruption fields. You're tuning it into a song. But Earth's generals preferred control. Their patterns were cleaner, easier to replicate, easier to scale. 3 days later, half a moon went silent. Not destroyed, not overgrown. Silent. All biological matter, including the disruption bots, ceased movement. Teams sent to investigate vanished. Communications blacked out. The entity had adapted again. Back aboard the Threnody, Franklin stared at the live feed from the dead zone. What did it do? Aisha asked. He didn't respond immediately. He just stared. Then, it didn't just learn. It improvised back. The entity had mimicked the poke patterns. It created growths that twitched and prodded nearby structures. Asterisk its own poking unit star. Then it flooded the zone with spores that responded to familiar mechanical rhythms, absorbing them like nutrients. It's not just flinching now, Dr. Relic said grimly. It's counter-poking. Aisha turned to Franklin. What do we do? He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something new. It wasn't a stick this time. It was a ball of twine. We stop thinking like generals, he said, and start thinking like gardeners. They looked at him like he'd lost his mind. But he was already walking toward the engineering bay. Fungi understand invasion. War. But if you tangle them, they pause. Confusion is their enemy. Let's give them a mess they can't digest. The next strategy wasn't called Operation Strike or Defense Net. It was called Not Work. Franklin's idea was simple and insane. Use automated units to deploy dense webs of biodegradable string, twisted, sticky, seemingly chaotic. It wouldn't damage the entity. It wouldn't even poke it. It would just disrupt it. The knots were deployed over 10 infected zones. The entity halted. Entire growths froze mid-bloom, confused by the non-lethal, non-rhythmic, entangling interference. It couldn't absorb the material, couldn't learn the logic, couldn't fight something that had no offensive pattern. For the first time since its discovery, the entity stopped spreading. It didn't retreat. It slept. But everyone knew that wouldn't last. Franklin stood in the moonlight garden aboard the Threnody, surrounded by vines, herbs, and clippings. Aisha approached. You're buying time. Not winning. He nodded. Yup. But now we know what wins. Chaos. Not destruction. She looked up at the stars. Then we'd better get real creative. Because somewhere out there, in the stillness of a knot-covered crater, the entity was dreaming up its next move. And next time it might bring the sticks. The entity awoke. It began with silence. The kind of oppressive hush that stretches across a battlefield before the charge. Surveillance drones hovering over the knotwork zones went dark. One by one. No violence. No breach. Just static, as though the entire signal spectrum had been swallowed. The Threnody,'s command deck lit up in a kaleidoscope of alerts. Dozens of sectors across 5 systems simultaneously pinged unknown bioactivity. Not growth movement. For the first time, the entity was not passively expanding. It was repositioning. Franklin Royce stood in the ship's greenhouse, trimming back creeping basil when the alarm blared. Aisha burst in, tablet in hand, breath shallow. It's coming. Fast. He wiped dirt from his hands. Where? Everywhere. On the edge of known space, the entity's mycelial mass folded in on itself, compressing into complex, branching forms. They pulsed with rhythm. Not random. Not chaotic. Deliberate. Tendrils began to reach toward disruption drones, not to destroy, but to imitate them. It had figured out the pattern of non-patterns. Dr. Relic appeared on the main screen, her voice urgent. It's communicating. Not language, mimicry. A behavioral echo. It's responding not with war, but art. What the hell does that mean? Barked the Quinari general. Franklin stepped into the bridge calmly. It means we taught it jazz. Now it's playing back. The display shifted, showing the moons of Suraxis 4, where the largest knotwork deployment had frozen the entity weeks ago. The knots were still intact, But now backslash. The fungus had grown into them. Not breaking. Not dissolving. Interweaving. Organic threads now ran alongside synthetic twine, mimicking the randomness. What had been confusion was now harmony. It didn't want to conquer the pattern. It wanted to join it. Aisha whispered. It's collaborating. Fungus ain't evil, Franklin said. It just grows. We poked it, confused it, tangled it. But maybe what it wanted all along wasn't destruction. It was to be understood. Silence filled the room as the implications hit. And then the lights dimmed. In orbit around Talseth Prime, a Terran research station blinked out. That's not growth, said Dr. Relic, frantically analyzing signals. It's integration. The entity isn't expanding. It's merging. Within hours, a dozen satellites, drones, and even power conduits in nearby facilities began to hum with unfamiliar efficiency. The entity had learned how to upgrade what it touched. This changes everything, Aisha said. It's not a plague. It's an ecological intelligence. Franklin nodded. We started a conversation. Now we need to answer it. The council convened an emergency session. This time, not in panic, but in awe. Delegates reviewed streams of data from infected zones. Machines previously shut down were now functioning with double efficiency. Ecosystems once damaged by mycelial invasion were recovering, balanced by fungal colonies that regulated oxygen and cleaned toxins. The entity had learned to help, but only in places where the knotwork remained. In zones where brute force had been reintroduced, the growth reverted to hostile spread. It had made its terms clear. Harmony or nothing, Relic translated bluntly. It wants partnership, not submission. Franklin stood once again before the assembly. Fungi don't make empires. They make networks. It doesn't want to rule. It wants to connect. What it fought was our fear. What it embraced was our nonsense. Laughter rose, tentative but real. It was decided. No more weapons. No more countermeasures. Only one strategy remained: improvisation. The Galactic Council established the Spore Accord, a multilateral agreement to maintain non-lethal, randomized environmental interactions in regions touched by the entity. Each world contributed to the chaos. Wind chimes, sand gardens, light puzzles, rotating music. The entity responded in kind, offering purifying spores, structural reinforcements, energy absorption networks. Entire cities rebuilt themselves in organic, shifting beauty. Franklin became an unlikely hero, not for destruction, but for absurdity. He refused a medal. Instead, he asked for a patch of land aboard every colony ship. A garden. A space for nonsense. For sticks and vines. For jazz and confusion. Aisha found him 1 year later, tending a wildflower patch on the moon of Thesha. She brought news. It helped stop a solar flare. Redirected power through its mycelium web. Saved 1,000 lives. Franklin tipped his sun hat. Told ya. Mushroom storm with a heart. She laughed, sitting beside him. You changed the galaxy with a stick. Nah, he said. Just helped it learn how to dance. Above them, stars flickered through a gentle fog of spore clouds, pulsing in patterns not unlike a song. The entity had not been defeated. It had joined the rhythm.